keeping that inner monologue positive is so important. I feel a deep sense of comfort in who I am.
What a time to be alive for you. I mean, over last year, you not only have had Red, White and Royal Blue, Mary and George, and now the idea of you, bam. Have you had time to soak it all in?
Yes and no. I think work coming first and foremost has been great, and I think that's when I feel most alive, is really being on these amazing film sets and playing these amazing characters. And you know, I think in some ways you've got to really put all of your validation into just the making of the thing, because you don't know the life of these projects, you know, after you make them, and then just to see this immense appreciation for all these projects is so humbling, and you know, the ability to have serious resonance with a lot of people, I think has just been really, really special for me.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea of you is amazing. Where were you at in your life when this role came along?
I just finished filming Red, White and Royal Blue, and Purple Hearts had actually just come out and was starting to blow up. And so I went to, I had read for it, and they'd liked me, and then they asked me to come to New York to chemistry test with Annie, and it was just kind of this whirlwind with this amazing, crazy chemistry test, and getting the role the next day. And it was the first time really I'd done, you know, 3 projects on the bounce like that.
What was it like going into that first chemistry read with Anne Hathaway? Were you like, oh my God, what is going on? Like, how did you prepare for that? And when did you feel like you first really clicked?
I mean, pretty immediately, I have to say. I think Annie carries herself with a huge amount of openness. There is just something very warm and radiant about her, and we just had so much fun. We just had like a naturalness, you know, between the two of us that really seemed to work. And I think becoming so comfortable with each other, even in the chemistry test, made the notion of going into filming with her just so much easier and calmer, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you are a complete triple threat in this. You sing, you act, you even do a little bit of dancing, yeah. And honestly, you're living out the pop band fantasy that I've always had in my life. What was that like to live out that boy band fantasy?
So much fun. I mean, it's so gratifying, and you know, definitely hard work trying to embody the physicality and trying to create these songs that really, you know, told the story of who this person is and how they develop as an artist, from that sort of classic boy band to really a kind of a singer-songwriter who I felt really creatively challenged, which was exciting.
And I think everyone's going to be desperate for the album to drop as soon as they've seen this. Do you think this is going to mark a new chapter in your music career, perhaps?
Who knows? I mean, music is something that I feel really passionate about, and you know, I've just been very lucky that acting has been, you know, my main gig. You know, hopefully when I get some free time, I'll be able to push forward with the music as well, because I made some really fantastic relationships through this filming process.
And I think as well that what's so special about this movie is it does make you really reflect on those moments, those life-changing moments you have, because it really does center around this moment of fate, right, where they meet, and a complete sliding doors moment. And we all have them. We all have unlike encounters that can really change our lives.
Yeah.
Is there a real sliding doors moment you think you've experienced, and a great moment of serendipity in a way?
The genesis of my career was serendipitous, because the play I auditioned for, where I got scouted by my agency, that led to me booking my first job, I almost didn't go to. You know, I was on the phone to my dad saying, this is ridiculous, I'm going to make a fool of myself, why am I here? I'm just going to come home. And you know, my dad, which he very much reminds me to this day, you know, he convinced me to go in. And, you know, had he not convinced me, I would not be sitting here talking with you, because I had no aspirations of acting at the time. And so I'd say, I mean, that's the moment that really jumps out to me. It felt very serendipitous.
And we all need a cheerleader in those situations where we question ourselves 100%, don't we?
You know, the goal, I think, for a lot of us should be to have our own internalized cheerleader, I think, in a way, so we can, you know, not speak badly to ourselves and encourage ourselves to take a big leap of faith.
Yeah. Have you always been a big cheerleader for yourself, or has that been something you've really had to go on a journey to discover?
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think I felt an immense amount of imposter syndrome. I mean, especially the first few years of my career, and you know, it's so natural as actors. We're oftentimes deriving validation from a lot of other sources outside of ourselves, and it can be an insecure job. It can be a very fragile job, and so, you know, it doesn't hurt when you're starring with a couple of Oscar winners. That's kind of a good sign that you're doing things right. Both Annie and Julie have been so wonderfully encouraging to me within the last year. I definitely worked on that inner voice a lot, and it just makes the whole experience just so much more fun now. Being able to kind of feel like you belong and you're right where you're supposed to be. I'm sure you've felt that as well in your line of work too. It's kind of a constant thing of reassurance, but we all need to do it. We all need to practice it,
and we all need to realize that we're enough just the way we are, right?
Yeah, well, because look, we live in an era of comparison and smoke and mirrors, and so I totally agree with you. I think keeping that inner monologue positive is so important.
And it must be so empowering when you are on a set, like you're saying, where you are working with these amazing actresses. I mean, you're kind of like Pokemon, you got to catch them all in terms of like Oscar winners right now.
Yeah.
Like, we'd take Anne Hathaway, we'd take Julianne Moore, let's go. Like, what do you think you've actually learned from working with such strong, amazing women on set as well?
Their professionalism is impeccable. I mean, their talent is obvious. I mean, who they are as people, I think that interests me the most, because, you know, I think I oftentimes think about legacy in this line of work, and you know, we're kind of all cavemen at the end of the day, and it's all about leaving our mark on the cave wall, you know, for people in the future. And I think the thing that's most important to me is, you know, people remembering me as someone who was hardworking and someone who was kind and open and giving, and they both have that in spades. And so it just makes the whole process so much more enjoyable. And I think, you know, with a lot of these projects where I've been number one and number two on the call sheet, you know, you set the tone for the entire cast and crew. And I like to think that I try and lead from the front, and I try and set a positive atmosphere, and I create a sense of community, because I think a lot of the time, you know, people who work on films, it's kind of like running away and joining the circus, and we all kind of have this sort of outsider mentality in some way, and they're both just immensely talented and immensely kind. I feel very, very lucky. I would love to work with them again in the future.
I mean, it's so important to have those supportive environments, especially in industry like the entertainment industry. And I think it's really interesting because on this podcast, we always have amazing women come on talking about building more supportive spaces. And I thought what's so interesting about this movie is you watch Anne Hathaway's character really go through the level of sexism that women have to go through in our society, right? And she's picked apart in a way that a man never would be. And actually, when we're constantly having these conversations on this podcast, one thing that always comes up is you need more amazing male allies who step up and support women. And it's amazing you're in a narrative which is kind of like that, right? How interesting was that to explore?
You know, as men, we have to set better examples for other men, and that's something I've always been passionate about, and educating, you know, the younger generations that are coming through, and I think, you know, we're not there yet, but we're doing really well in the industry. I think putting talented women in positions of power and decision making, and you know, there are a lot of amazing female-led stories that I think we're seeing much more commonly on screen nowadays, which is good.
Do you feel like you've got to a position now where you feel like you've really can sit in yourself? And what's that journey look like for you to get to that point?
over the years, I think my sense of self has really been bolstered by my experiences as an actor and growing into my adulthood. And I feel a deep sense of comfort in who I am and who I am to other people. And I think, I would just say to a lot of people, maybe in their early 20s or late teens, when we really kind of start analyzing identity and sense of self, is to just kind of have patience, because I think it happens so naturally when you're older. It's about putting yourself out there and challenging yourself, and you gain I think an immense amount of comfort in yourself and confidence in your abilities, and you also kind of care less about things that that shouldn't really bother you too. And I think that's the great thing about aging. And I love what you said about Selene just rediscovering herself. I think really we use coming of age story in a teen context a lot, but I think really, I mean, the idea of you in a lot of ways is a coming of age story, and it's a celebration of age. Keep pushing yourself and making yourself uncomfortable, because that's the brilliance of my job, because I'm constantly in sort of emotionally vulnerable or uncomfortable positions. And now as a 29-year-old guy, I mean, it's just night and day from when I first started in this industry. I really do enjoy being in these spaces and challenging myself.
Have you kind of learned with that there's so much power in being more vulnerable and almost being more sensitive and leading into those things that we're kind of taught that men shouldn't be, and men shouldn't be on our screens too?
I mean, vulnerability is a superpower. And I think I've always fought for my characters to have a dimension of vulnerability. That's what grounds us all, is we all experience this at different points. And I agree with what you said. I mean, especially as men, we need to do better. And as people who are now becoming more and more comfortable within ourselves, we also have to help the younger generations of men. And that's something I've been passionate about for a long time. I'd like to sort of continue talking to teenage young men who are maybe struggling with images of self-doubt or whatever, because we sometimes don't get the feedback I think we require. I think it's exciting. I think a lot of men are really being bolstered by a sense of acceptance in the last few years. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're definitely moving in the right direction.
When you look at even what you've just done in the last year, right? Well, like Red, White and Royal Blue, for instance, which was such an amazing movie that did so much of representation on such a huge level, showing a queer love story in a whole different way. How proud are you of that movie and what that has been able to achieve and do for a whole community?
Yeah, so proud. I mean, I think it's fair to say that movie's had a lot of resonance, and it's just the wholesome content that I think a lot of people had not seen and now have. And it's a little bit of history for a lot of fans of both the book and the movie. And it's something I hope to sort of continue to do in my work. Enjoyment, message, empowering. I think these are all things that make me feel a lot of purpose in my line of work.
And one thing that is a weird constant thread between all the work you do as well is you do have to do your fair share of intimate scenes. And I actually think they're whenever I talk to actors about this, it can be a very sort of like transformative experience for people, because it can be quite empowering in a way. Have you found that leaning into that has been an empowering experience, has maybe made you feel more comfortable in your own skin as well?
In those situations, I like to really find what I can learn about the character and what we can show the audience about the character in those situations. And as you said, at this point, I'm very comfortable in those spaces. I've done so much, I think, important and fun intimacy work over the years, and especially in Mary and George. I'm just very proud of all the work we did and how it was shot. Oliver Hermanis, a wonderful director, really set an incredible visual tone for a lot of that work.
And I think it's so incredible what you are doing and what you've been able to do in the last couple of years. But I think a lot of people would be like, oh my God, he's appeared and look all these amazing things he's been doing. But behind the scenes, we both know that like there's a whole decade that goes before that, a whole load of hard work that has to go. What were kind of like maybe the struggle years like? Or were there ever any moments where you questioned whether this was even going to be possible for you to get to this amazing point you are now?
The crazy thing is, I've at least done one movie in the lead role for every year I've been an actor. And most actors would say, you're so lucky, how dare you complain about, that amount of work. But, when I was starting out, it was shooting for a month, 2 months, and then the rest of the year was trying to book the next job. And so for the first 3-4 years of my career, it was like, just hitting top speed and then braking really aggressively and wanting to kind of hit that kind of that like terminal velocity again, because my passion for acting just grew immensely. I realized that I'd gone from having never explored it before to it really being my life calling in a way, and something that I felt very just worked for me in a lot of different ways. And so I had to do a lot of part-time work to kind of stay afloat while I was doing that. But with age and perspective, the work ethic that I think I had to have to stay passionate about my craft and my passion, and do all these other sort of jobs that, felt quite mundane at the time. It was very humbling, and as I said, built a work ethic. And then, then finally being able to get to the point where I could really just be a full-time actor. I mean, you appreciate it so much more. And, there are so many immensely talented people within our industry who would love those opportunities. And if you take it for granted, if you don't show up prepared, if you don't work hard, if you're not kind to the people around you, then you're kind of spitting in their faces a little bit.
We all know that those moments of failure and those struggle times and they're the times where you learn your work ethic, right? And then you work so hard and you get to this point and then you're like, oh, I now need to actually enjoy the thing that I'm doing.
I think the best education you can kind of get, it's just being in life and not in a kind of a bubble away from humanity, because, the goal is to perfectly channel humanity and create a very textured person that feels accessible to us. And if you're not doing the part-time work, if you're not in and around it, like that, I for all these sort of up and coming actors who maybe are a bit down on themselves that they're having to do multiple jobs, maybe some waitering. I was a caterer, anything like that. Just know that you're collecting ammunition there. You're using all of this stuff. You're collecting the stuff that you can use in the future for your work. So I think try and see it as an encouraging step in the right direction.
Oh my God, 100%. Like, sometimes you learn the most in those shit retail jobs or being that caterer, right?
Yeah, we've all been there. I mean, most of us have been there. So yeah, don't worry about it. You're not alone.